everybody, it's Menopause Barbie. We're here doing our series on menopause, your management, your way, now and for the rest of your life. Welcome to my boudoir. I thought it'd be great to meet in my boudoir today because we're talking about hormones. This is tutorial number 9. It picks up where the last one left off. And if you're following in the book, today the pages are 67 through 70. And if you're following along in the outline notes, we're on page 6. Just that one page, page 6. Okay, so the discussion is on hormones. And the key is this. Menopause is all about hormones and their effects. And there are many different hormones that contribute to your menopause experience. They each have their own function. It's almost like they each have a personality. So what I want to do for you is go through the discussion of hormones so that you understand how they differ, and that will determine how able you are to make use of the information in terms of how your menopause plays itself out. Okay, so the goal here is for you to be able to manage your menopause your way, and knowing the way hormones function is part of that. So, first hormone, of course, is estrogen. That's why I decided to be in my boudoir, because it's very girly, and estrogen is the primary female hormone. So estrogen is the one that makes your skin soft, it makes our voices higher, it makes your features dainty, and it gives you prominent breasts. So estrogen is probably fairly familiar to you. Now, we say estrogen, but the truth is, in our bodies, we have 3 types of estrogen. The primary one during your reproductive years is called estradiol. And then there's estriol, which is one of the minor ones. And a third one is estrone. And estrone becomes primary in your menopausal years. So once you leave your reproductive years, estrone becomes much more prominent. The normal range of estradiol, this is the most common one in your reproductive years. The normal range during your reproductive years is between 50 and 150 picograms per milliliter. Now, don't worry about those units. There's all kinds of units that I'll talk about. I'll mention them. Please don't focus on them. All they'll do is confuse you and think, what's that? What's a picogram per milliliter? It's not important. So 50 to 100 is what you need to think about. Now, you know that menopause occurs as a result of estrogen loss. So it's this estradiol that takes a nosedive when you go through menopause. And so when you go through menopause, it goes from that 50 to 100 figure down to between 0 and 45. Big drop. Now, estrogen has a partner. The partner hormone to estrogen is progesterone. And progesterone and estrogen, they act in harmony with each other throughout your entire reproductive life. It's like they're dancing. Progesterone means pro, for, or in support of, gest, which stands for gestation or pregnancy, own, which means hormone. So progesterone is the hormone that supports pregnancy. And its main function during pregnancy is to produce a calming, sedative, relaxing effect. It's almost an anti-anxiety hormone in pregnancy when it's super high. But progesterone plays a part in everything that happens to us throughout our lives. Puberty, progesterone's rise is one of the things that makes us kind of crabby and irritable as pubertal teenagers. Then in PMS, progesterone rises just before your period. That's the PMS hormone. It's the one that makes you just want to bite everyone's head off. Pregnancy. I just told you it's the pregnancy hormone. It plays a big part in supporting the pregnancy. And then postpartum, after you've delivered, progesterone hangs around, and sometimes it causes postpartum depression. And then finally in menopause, here it goes again. It plays a part in causing some of the symptoms we can have during menopause. Now, progesterone, while you're having periods, is in the range of 0.1 to 0.5. Again, it's that picogram per milliliter unit. Don't worry about that. But 0.1 to 0.5. Then, with menopause, it decreases, and it goes way down to less than 0.05. Huge drop, okay? Now, estrogen and progesterone interact throughout your menstrual cycle. What you see now is a graph. It shows you estrogen in red throughout your 28-day menstrual cycle, and it shows you progesterone in blue throughout your 28-day menstrual cycle. And what you see there is that estrogen starts rising just after your period ends. Then it continues to rise steadily in the first half of your cycle, and it peaks at mid-cycle, and then it steadily declines. Progesterone doesn't even participate, doesn't even show itself on the scene until mid-cycle, and then it begins to rise. It peaks about a week before your next period begins, then it stabilizes for about 3 days, and then 3 days before your period starts, it drops. Now think about PMS. PMS happens at the same time that your progesterone is at its highest. Now if we look at that same graph again and see what the same interaction between estrogen and progesterone does to the lining of your uterus, you'll see how the two together cause your uterine lining to change throughout your 28-day cycle. So now you see a graph that has your estrogen in blue, it has your progesterone in green. It's like they changed colors, I don't know why. And below all that, you see some orange and red. Now that orange and red hill-like structure on the bottom of the graph is your uterine lining. That's the endometrium. We learned that 2 tutorials ago, endometrium, the lining in your uterus. That slide shows how estrogen and progesterone act on that lining. So what you see here is that estrogen thickens the lining of your uterus. And then progesterone comes in and stabilizes that thickening. It causes it to stop getting thicker. And then when progesterone rapidly drops, it causes your lining that's now really thick to start shedding, and that is your period. So what's happening is estrogen is thickening the lining of your uterus just in case an egg gets fertilized. Progesterone stabilizes it to form a cushion to house and nurture a fertilized egg. And then if no fertilization occurs, that drop in progesterone allows the lining to shed because you don't need it. So the summary of all this, all that graph stuff, all that confusing stuff, the summary is this. Estrogen thickens your uterine lining, and progesterone thins your uterine lining. That is all you have to remember. I will try to always give you the take-home message, the bottom line, so that you don't have to remember all these details. But the key is just to remember that estrogen thickens, progesterone thins. And that is going to be really important in menopause, just as it was during your reproductive years. So during menopause, progesterone will play a critical role in terms of how you use hormones. It will control how thick your uterine lining gets, and or it will cause your uterine lining to shed. So remember that progesterone controls how thick your lining gets. Now we go to testosterone. And you know that it's a male hormone. It's the primary male hormone. And you think, why are we talking about testosterone? Well, because it's important for women too. You already know that it causes coarse, thick hair. It causes your skin to be rough like a guy's skin. It causes acne. Think back to high school and junior high. Who had all the acne? The guys. High testosterone. And, of course, it causes increased sex drive. But we have testosterone too. Females, we have testosterone, and we get it from two places. It comes from our ovaries, and it comes from our adrenal glands. Now, the quantities that we produce are much, 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 much smaller than males. But it's still important to us. And when we go through menopause, our testosterone decreases as well as the estrogen and progesterone. But how much it decreases varies. Remember in the last tutorial we talked about the difference between natural menopause and surgical menopause? Natural menopause is when you just go through menopause at the regular time. It's under the governance of Mother Nature, just happens in a natural fashion. When that is the way you go through menopause, your testosterone decreases by 40 to 60%. But if you have surgical menopause, which means sudden menopause occurring because of surgery, chemotherapy, or radiation therapy, your testosterone decreases by 80%. There's a pretty big difference in those two things. Now, during our reproductive years, when we're having our cycles, females only have 0.4 to 1 nanogram per milliliter, ignore the units, 0.4 to 1, and in menopause we have 0.1 to 0.3. So we go way underneath the normal range for our reproductive years. Now, when we go through menopause, even though the actual quantity of testosterone decreases, it can be more concentrated than it was before menopause. Something that's more concentrated can be stronger and have a stronger effect. So between the estrogen decreasing as well as the testosterone and the testosterone being more concentrated, sometimes we notice symptoms that are due to testosterone. So when we get to menopause, what's important is the relative amount of estrogen to progesterone. That is what's going to determine your symptoms. So see, these hormones, they all decrease when you go through menopause. But how much they decrease with respect to one another is very critical in your symptoms. And of course, over the course of your menopausal transition, the ratios of these hormones will not stay the same. You are not a robot. So understanding the effects of each hormone will become very important to you in determining which hormone you need to tweak in order to get rid of the symptoms you don't like. So we will later talk in much greater depth about all the details about each hormone, but today I'm just helping you identify the players. I want you to know what the main hormones are so that when we delve into them deeper later on, you'll have a basic knowledge of them, okay? So all your sex hormones are going to decrease when you go through menopause. Now we're going to switch gears because we're going to talk about some other hormones that you may not be so familiar with. And in order to do that, I'm going to show you my prop. I made a prop for you today. This is one of my homemade props, okay? I know you love these. You know, there are all these medical props that I could be using, but I think that sometimes these homemade ones that I make serve you better because I try to focus on just what I'm trying to teach you, and I don't have a lot of other things in the proper model to confuse you. And most of the medical props try to kind of serve all purposes, and I think that can be confusing. So I'm narrowing things down. So my prop today is a brain and your ovaries, and I didn't put it up there and stand behind it from the beginning because it makes me look like I have two great big huge boobs, and I do not have two great big huge boobs. And so here we have our two ovaries and the brain. Now we're going to talk about two hormones that come from the brain. The first one is called FSH, and it stands for follicle stimulating hormone. Now, follicle stimulating hormone, which is what this little card represents, is produced in your brain, okay? Your brain is producing this hormone. So this little card represents, all these little cards represent FSH in quantity. The hormone FSH travels to your ovaries and says to the ovaries, produce estrogen. Okay? Now, as long as your ovaries obey the command and produce the estrogen, your FSH is satisfied. It stays nice and low. It's happy. So what would happen is FSH would say, hey, okay, this is like a voice bubble, okay? The FSH would say, hey, ovary, produce estrogen. And the ovary would say, oh, sure, no problem. I'll produce estrogen. And it just starts pouring estrogen out. Okay, this is one of my scarves, but it's a good demo for estrogen. So here comes the estrogen, and the brain says, aren't you nice? Thank you. Okay, so FSH stays low, just 2 cards, because there's plenty of estrogen. Now, FSH is going to fluctuate through your entire menstrual cycle throughout all your reproductive years. And during your reproductive life, FSH is going to be in the range of 2 to 15 milli-international units per milliliter. Who cares about the units? Just remember 2 to 15. And so this FSH is going to be up and down, higher and low. It's going to be longer and shorter in terms of my scarf, depending on where you are in your cycle. But there's going to be plenty of estrogen flowing out of the ovary. Now, when you begin menopause, your ovaries are going to go on strike. They're not going to produce estrogen. So then your brain is going to say, I'm going to have to produce more FSH in order to get the ovary to obey the command. So what happens then is, here you go, the FSH speaks up and says, okay, ovary, please produce estrogen again. Nothing happens. And the brain says, yoo-hoo, ovary, sweet ovary, we need some more estrogen, please. Nothing. Ovary just ignores it. So then the FSH, the brain says, maybe you didn't hear me, ovary, we need estrogen, please. And then the ovary ignores it again. So now the FSH is getting a little bit upset. It says, hey, ovary, pay attention. We're low on estrogen. Nothing. So now the FSH is screaming, ovary, stop sleeping on the job. Wake up and give me some estrogen. See, all these little cards are FSH. So finally the FSH says, hey, shall I spell it out for you? E-S-T-R-O-G-E-N. Ovary still does nothing. So FSH screams again. Ovary, you lazy bum, what do I have to do to get some estrogen? Ovary is still not functioning. FSH says, ovary, you're pathetic. Get busy. Estrogen now. Do you see what's happening here? Finally it says, ugh, why must I scream? So what you see here is the brain put out this much FSH because the ovary ignored all of its requests for estrogen. So brain FSH goes sky high trying to get some estrogen. So all of this is the FSH that's produced trying to get the ovary to wake up and do its job. So what happens in menopause is this FSH skyrockets, and the level it reaches is greater than 30 milli-international units per milliliter. Remember, in your reproductive years it was 2 to 15. FSH at menopause goes to 30. Okay, so you're seeing how this works. This is called a feedback loop. It's communication between the brain and the ovary. They're feeding back to each other. They're responding to one another. And what you realize is anytime you have a low FSH, it's associated with high estrogen. A high FSH like this is going to be associated with low estrogen. That's how it works. That is called a feedback loop. So now we talked about progesterone earlier, didn't we? Well, progesterone has the same kind of feedback loop with another brain hormone called LH. LH stands for luteinizing hormone. And it, just like FSH, is produced in your brain, and it travels to the ovary and says, hey, ovary, produce progesterone. So here you have LH, very nice, saying, hey, ovary, Darling, time to produce a little progesterone, please. How does the ovary respond? The ovary says, oh, sure, no problem. I'll give you some progesterone. I have plenty of it here. How about some more? And it starts pouring out the progesterone. Okay, here comes my scarf, I'm just pulling it out. So there's plenty of progesterone. And so the LH says, oh, you are so efficient. Thank you. And that's the end of it. This LH level is low. You can call it like 2 units. And so during your reproductive years, your LH will fluctuate through your cycle, and it will be in the range of 2 to 20 milli-international units per milliliter. But then menopause comes along, and your ovaries are preparing to retire. So when LH says, hey, I'm going to give you the command to produce progesterone, they disobey, just like they did with the estrogen. So here you have the LH saying, okay, calling all ovaries, please produce progesterone. Nothing happens. So then the LH says, are you there, ovary? I asked for some progesterone. Waits a while. Nothing happens. A few more minutes. The brain says, can you hear me? Why are you not responding? It's putting out a little more LH. Waits some more and then says, oh, come on, not again. Get going. Still, nothing, nothing, nothing. Finally, it says, ovary, why are you so sluggish these days? Waits a little longer. Nothing happens. So then it says, darn it, ovary, why are you so inconsistent? I need progesterone. Nothing. Produce progesterone now or you'll regret it. So now it's threatening, okay? And finally it says, I've had it with you. You're completely worthless. So it has put out all this LH, and it's gotten no response from the ovary. Progesterone refuses to appear. And so all this FSH is the brain's attempt to force the ovary, to scream at the ovary to produce the progesterone. It's very much like if you have a child who's got a messy room, and you say, clean up your room, and she doesn't. And what do? You're a little more forceful. You start screaming. It's the same thing. Your voice level responds to the fact that there's no response to your command. So your LH level is going to rise at menopause when your ovaries fail to produce progesterone. And the level of LH is going to go up to greater than 40 milli-international units per milliliter. Okay? They were at the high in reproduction, your reproductive years was 20, and they double to 40. So the summary of this is that a low LH is associated with a high progesterone level, and a high LH is associated with a low progesterone level. It's exactly the same as it was with FSH. When these are high, estrogen and progesterone are low. When these are low, estrogen and progesterone are high. Okay, all it is an attempt to get the hormones to be produced as they should. All you have to remember is that FSH controls estrogen, and if estrogen is low, FSH is high, and LH controls progesterone, and if progesterone is low, LH is high. So now you understand how these hormones work, and FSH and LH are like the governors. They're the brain hormones that try to rule the estrogen and progesterone. So now you've got a basic knowledge of the players when it comes to the female hormones. Testosterone will come into play too, but it's not one of the ones that has a specific governing brain hormone to cause it to function. You'll see how it comes into play later on. So look at that. You made it through this tutorial. I didn't give you a quiz. You didn't have to fill out a worksheet. You just got to sail through this one. I'm going to step away from my ovaries that make me look like I have big boobs. I don't have big boobs. So that's it. I thank you so much for joining me. And the next tutorial will pick up where this one leaves off. I hope you're subscribing and getting your email notifications when the videos are ready. I'm having a great time doing this for you, and I love making the little fun models. So that's it for today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye!